Welcome to this virtual conversation about the documentary We Believe in Dinosaurs. Thank you so much for joining us. A new venture for everyone, and I'm so thrilled. My name is Lauren King. I write about film for the Boston Globe. I'm happy to be moderating this conversation between Clayton Brown and Monica Long-Ross. They are the co-directors for the film that you've all seen, and they also produced it with Amy Ellison. And as well, Monica was the writer, and Clayton edited the film. So we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm really excited. As those of you who've seen it, I'm sure have lots of questions too about this very timely and very provocative film. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little Q&A icon. You can click on that, type in a question, and hopefully we'll have time to get to as many as we can once I ask a few of my own. So click on that icon, type in your question, and we'll get to those later. But for right now, I know you've all seen the film and are eager to hear what the co-directors have to say. So I'm just going to start out with a general question, and this is really for either one of you. And if you both want to add what you want to say, you can follow each other because it's a general question. I did not know anything about this park and arc in Kentucky. So it was really illuminating for me. When did you hear about it, and what was the genesis of hearing about this and thinking it would make a good film and having it pull you toward wanting to make a documentary about it? Either one of you.
Yeah. You want me to go first, Monica?
Sure.
This is actually our third film, our third feature. And we focus on the intersection of science and culture in America. So our first film was about high energy particle physics. It ended up also being about politics and science funding and priorities in America, that sort of thing. We then went into our second film, which was about cold fusion, the two guys in 1989 that thought they had discovered cold fusion. And that was about science and the media and greed and the rights to publish and that sort of thing. And so when it came to be our third film, we wanted to get at another strange intersection of science and culture, which is science and religion. Mm-hmm. And we didn't want to make a film just about religion or about religious attitudes towards science. But in doing research, we found this organization, Answers in Genesis, which before they made the Ark Encounter, they had this, the Creation Museum, which looks like, sounds like, to anyone who goes there, it feels like an actual science museum, except it's a completely alternate universe of their own science, which is based on the idea that the Bible is literally true. The earth is 6,000 years old. Noah's flood really happened. And they go about what they describe as proving these realities in a scientific way in this museum. So we learned about them, and coincidentally, fortunately for us, they were just about to embark on this new venture of creating the Ark Encounter. And so it was a good bit of serendipity for us because that was the topic we wanted to go into. And then here's this really nice story. As we say, it's sort of like that's a great hook to hang the story on. So we were able to get in the full, I hope this is the only time we use this pun, the full arc of the story, where we were able to be there right from the very beginning as they were planning it all the way through opening day and then a bit beyond.
Yeah, yeah.
I would add that when we were doing the Atom Smashers, and that's about, 15 years ago, that was when the Dover court case was happening in Pennsylvania, where a school board wanted to put creationism into a classroom. And it went to court, and it was considered religion, and you couldn't put it in a science class. And at that time, we were interviewing scientists and physicists at Fermilab in Illinois, a nuclear lab, and we went off topic, and we would say to them, do you have this problem in your country? Because they were from all over the world, and say, do you have creationism? Do you have this argument between putting evolution and creationism both in the science classroom? And they would say, they would be from European countries that are traditionally thought of as Catholic countries. And they would say, no, we have this, no, this is a very American problem. And so Clayton and I have been thinking about it for a long time, of this very American problem. And so when the story for the arc came up and we heard about it, it just seemed, okay, now we have a story to go with all these things we've been thinking about for a long time.
There was you had extraordinary access. It seems like a lot of the people really trusted you. You had obviously earned their trust to get in there and have such amazing access to the workers. And I don't know about Ken Ham. I'm going to have you tell me why he doesn't seem to appear. You have a lot of footage of him, but he doesn't seem to give an interview. So I want to ask each of you, and maybe Monica, you could start this time. How did you earn the trust so that they didn't think that you were just going to criticize them and not do a fair piece? And what were the challenges of people like Ken who didn't want to appear on camera, if that is the case, that he didn't want to?
We did have an interview with him, and he would appear on camera. We made decisions to do other people. But we started by going to the conference in Pittsburgh. And we told them that we were from Chicago and a documentary film company, and we were interested, that we had never heard of creation science, and we were interested in what they had to say. When we made a determination that we were not there to debate, we were there to listen. We were also not there to mock anything. We saw that at this time, when science denial was a real discussion around global warming and other issues and anti-vaxxers, it behooved us not to make that kind of mocking, kind of let's make fun of them kind of thing. So we went in with a serious intent, and I think very good questions, and determined that we were there to listen. Whether we disagreed with them or not, we wanted to say, what do you believe? Who are you? And why do you believe this? And from there, we met Georgia Purdom from the Creation Museum and asked her for an interview. And she said, sure, can you do it at the Creation Museum? We said, oh yeah, that would be wonderful. So from then on, she introduced us to the designers and others. And I'd like to think that we asked really good questions, and we came there with a listening ear. And so if they trusted us or didn't trust us, because I think we asked hard questions at times too, we were very pleased to learn that they are not a closed group. They're very proud of what they believe and very willing to talk about it. And so it went from there. It was not like you had to force them to say what they believe. You just had to ask the right questions.
Yes.
You want to say something to that, Clay?
Well, I think that's true. And one thing also to jump off on that point, not only are they not a closed group, people often think, that we had to somehow infiltrate, but actually they're very forward-facing. They have a PR department. They have a very savvy media team. They're constantly sending out press releases. They want anyone and everyone to come to their museums because they believe, they're so confident in what they believe and the facts that they believe that they have, that they're willing to talk to anybody, including, known atheists, known skeptics, all of news. Yeah. So some of the footage, we were there with a lot of other media organizations. And so, but we did have, we developed a nice relationship with some of the people there, especially Doug Henderson, the designer there. And I feel like, he and I still stay in touch. So we developed an actual, a friendship, because I think there was this sense of we're being honest with each other. And I think that comes through in the film. And that was, as Monica says, that was always our intent, was to be honest. And I feel like the people in the film would see themselves on screen and realize, well, yep, that's me. That's what I said. And that was always our intent.
I did read, and I'd like you both to comment on this, that there was it wasn't easy to get scientists in the community to talk about this, because it does seem that it's a small community, and it's a lot of it. I mean, even Dan Phelps, I think there was some very moving scenes where he's criticized, made to feel uncomfortable. He's kind of alone in his championing of science. So tell us about how that was. Were you in fact rebuffed by some of the scientists?
Okay, we went to a local natural history museum. We also have to say it's not just there. We went to the Field Museum in Chicago. It's very difficult, we discovered, for scientists to talk about religion. They feel that they're going to come across as intolerant, and they're going to get criticism. And if you're from an institution, you may get backlash.
Yeah. And
that they don't have the funds or ability to deal with. And so that was a surprise to us. We got right into the Creation Museum, but we went to these other places. They say we can't mention creationism, we can't mention religion on camera, we can't talk about it. Wow. And so we realized it was really hard terrain for them to do that, but we also realized that science isn't talking back to this, and so that's a difficulty. That conversation isn't going on, and most of them we heard the name right away of, go talk to Dan Phelps. He'll talk about it.
Okay.
And that's what led us to Dan Phelps, is that they told us right in Cincinnati and the surrounding areas of the Creation Museum, no, we can't say anything, but Dan Phelps will. And he was the only one in Kentucky, because we wanted Kentucky voices. That's the other thing we decided, is that it's a Kentucky story and we shouldn't bring people from outside criticizing him. We should tell it inside. And Dan was Kentucky, but he was the only one in Kentucky who's a scientist that we could get to talk about it.
And I would say there was a mixture of responses from scientists. Some scientists were so dismissive of creationism that they just felt like, well, this is just a small group of people. Why should we even respond to this? And so they were not willing to engage for that reason. Other scientists, I think, were very passionate about it, but were in some ways prohibited from responding by their institutions, because their institutions knew that if they critiqued creationism or the Creation Museum, there would be a PR disaster that they would then have to spend a lot of time and money on. And as we heard, there were some funders who funded both institutions. And so they were not willing to risk some of their funding streams by critiquing the Creation Museum.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Because that leads me to the whole issue of watching this film, which I thought was so good in light of what's happening now with constant misinformation, the mistrust of science, the mistrust of expertise, and it goes on in numerous facets of our life, but particularly now, where we're dealing with a health and scientific crisis. That denial is rampant through the government and through the authority figures that should be leading us here. And you can see it throughout your film, and what you're talking about with the scientists' reluctance to come forward, that's so disturbing, and I'm happy that you brought this out in your film. The mistrust of science on so many levels. It's allowed to run rampant, and if they're not speaking out against it, it's kind of letting their side have ceding the platform to them a little bit more than I mean, was that something you were aware of? Obviously you were.
Yeah, but I would say two aspects of that. One, when David in the coffee shop says, I had all these, he says, people understandably have a lot of gaps in their knowledge of science because science is hard. And he said, I had all those gaps filled in by creationism. And another thing that we learned about scientists and science in America is because of that first attitude I mentioned, where scientists are so dismissive of the whole notion of creationism, that why should we even bother talking about that? There's a little bit of a vacuum because there isn't an aggressive push on the part of science to say, no, really, evolution is a big deal and it's real. And so there's a bit of a vacuum there. And as David said, creationism is more than happy to come in and supply these very simple, easy answers. And so for that reason, people, there's in some ways it's unchallenged. These ideas, they're very easy to accept, they're very easy to understand, and they're unchallenged. Yep. And then the other aspect of it is in our first film, The Atom Smashers, we interviewed a writer called Chris Mooney, who had just written a book, this is back in 2008 or so, written a book called The Republican War on Science. Mm-hmm. And he predicted at some point we'll have Democrat science, we'll have Republican science. And I think that, of course, is the case. And so you see science no longer this neutral authority. It's so politicized that each side doesn't really believe the other side's science. It has to be part of an agenda. Yeah. And I think one of the most chilling moments, or I don't even know how to process it, but when Mike Pence, as an earlier politician, is asked about evolution, and he gives this very neutral answer, doesn't quite deny it, but professes not to understand it. And so I think there's a politicization of science, and there's also just I don't know, and I don't need to know type of thing in politics.
And there's one other thing that we discovered, and that is the teaching of evolution in high school. Yeah. That there are many teachers who are reluctant to teach, or one teacher said, I don't use the E word. I teach changes over time because that can go either way. And mostly it's a reluctance that they're going to get pushback from parents or even just one child in the classroom who's going to disrupt the classroom. And I talked to a young biology teacher who said she was counseled by, and this is in California, who was counseled by another teacher not to teach evolution in the school because she's just going to be problems. And so though it's in the Common Core, there's a certain segment of this country that either gets creationism in like either or, you can believe either or just doesn't, or they just skip evolution because it might bring up problems. So there's this other gap that's happening in education.
Yes. Yeah, so some of the most amazing scenes in the film were with children looking at the exhibits in the museum and what they were being taught. And then that footage you had with Ken Ham teaching the kids to repeat, were you there? I mean, that's their defense. If someone tries to talk about evolution, to ask, were you there? And the kids have to, spout this back to him. That was something.
Yeah, and I think Dan's response to that is so good. It's like, no, you don't have to be there. You can look at the evidence that is, and David said something that I thought was really interesting too, off camera. He said, actually, there is here. We are there. We are here. There's not a disconnect between there and here. It's the same place.
Yeah. We've got quite a few questions, not surprisingly, with a film this timely. Okay, let's see. From JVS, have the filmmakers or those opposing the project had threats leveled at them? Ooh. Any maybe not threats, but any kind of backlash or any problems with it? Monica?
We do have a little bit. We haven't had threats, no. The Creationists, I think our film is so even tempered and and fair. We're not unbiased, you know, that certainly, but we're fair. Then I think they would hard pressed to go that far with us. But we have had a campaign to give us 1 star on our IMDb?
IMDb page, yeah.
And so we went down in the ratings, and the campaign from a creationist was, don't watch the film, but just go on there and give it 1 star. So if people who are watching this would like to go out and give us a review, that could very much help, because that's a very media savvy kind of move. Just like Dan has gotten some wonderful emails supportive of him, but as it shows in the film, that Ken Ham will troll and say something about them in his blog to his many followers. And but that's a very media savvy thing to just get us low ratings. Very.
Well, I mean, I don't know if people, I mean, when you're watching it at home, you can watch it right through the end of the credits. Sometimes in the theater, they stop the credits, because that's so interesting, the footage you include during the credits, where he's saying something about you guys. Ken is in an interview, and they're all sort of bad-mouthing you a little bit at that final clip. And, you know, it's just interesting that they're saying things like that.
That actually happened before the film was even finished.
Yeah,
they hadn't seen it, but we had done an interview about it, and you know, that's another thing that Ken Ham is very savvy about, is they are very quick to be the David against the Goliath. Yeah. You know, so at any point they're persecuted, or they feel themselves to be persecuted, that's a good thing for them, because then they can, in a cynical way, maybe they can raise money, which is what happened with the Bill Nye debate.
Yeah,
they raised a tremendous amount of money to finish the arc based on this notion that they were under siege. And so the language that Ken Ham uses in that little clip at the end is very much under attack, and we are the attackers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's the new term that we've become used to is gaslighting. There's some gaslighting going on when they're actually saying that people who believe in science are brainwashed, and he's using that pitch when he's talking to that first crowd. We're going to fight back against brainwashing.
Yeah, that's one of the other really fascinating thing. And Monica and I debated, well, should we put this earlier in, or how do we want to deal with this? But when they say at the end there, this is not science versus religion. This is not science versus science. They call it religion versus religion. And in this very savvy move, they equate all of mainstream science to be a belief system. And that makes scientists go crazy, because science is exactly the opposite of a belief system. It's a fact system. And so by saying, oh no, we're both belief systems, just choose the one that sounds better to you, and by the way, ours is better. Yes. They do this very leveling of all the arguments of science, which is a really dangerous thing, and it's unfortunate, but fascinating.
The idea of our title is We Believe in Dinosaurs. And that, of course, is the word believe that drives scientists crazy. They want to say we accept theories, not belief. So we were playing with that.
Yes, yeah. Okay, this question comes from Liz Holbrook. I was surprised to learn that almost 40% of people in the United States believe in these extreme views. Did you research other states with large populations of creationists?
Other states in the United States?
As opposed to, I think she's saying, other than Kentucky, where this all takes place, were there other places that you found? I mean, I'm interested in too, when you were there, like, in other words, when you were actually in the trenches filming this, how prevalent it was. I mean, did you find that, I think, Clayton, you used the word like parallel universe or alternate universe. And in some ways, that's how it seems.
In the first thing, I think at last count, we found 17 creation museums. Some of them are very small within churches.
Mhm.
The Creation Museum in Kentucky is certainly the largest and most sophisticated, but others are on the books.
Okay.
That's in the United States and in the southern provinces of Canada. There's a couple up there. I think what I told when we did like 3 screenings in Kentucky in early February before we were all locked in. And I told Kentucky, you are not alone. You don't have to feel that this is just your state. There's a professor at the University of Minnesota, Randy Moore, who's done research on this across the United States. And there are creationists in every state. There are, just like conservative evangelicals are going to be in every state. There are problems with creationism being put into classrooms in all across the United States. So in answer to that question about, did you look at other states? It isn't just Kentucky.
Right.
I tell people, go and talk to your school board and see if evolution is being taught in your high school biology classes, and you might be surprised. So, and talk to your biology teacher and tell them, my daughter Margaret is coming in with these fossils like Dan tried to do, and I want to know that evolution is being taught in the classroom. Check it out, because it's a revelation to us of how widespread it was. It isn't just Kentucky. No.
No. Right. But when you were there, did you sometimes, how prevalent was it there? Like, is this just, when I was surprised in the film, when those bus loads were coming, when the museum opened, when the Ark opened, just to know that these aren't just a few fringe lunatics. Bus loads. So was that a surprise to you guys, or were you realizing that it kind of permeates some of the culture in these places?
Well, that's, I think what Monica's point is, it's not just the culture in these places. As the statistic says, the Gallup Poll is 40% of America. That's everywhere. Now, that Gallup Poll doesn't necessarily say these are all creationists, but that they believe humans were created by God in their present form less than 10,000 years ago. So it's at least a denial of evolution. Whether or not they fully subscribe as creationists is hard to know, but it's everywhere. It's they are us and we are them. That was the thing that we were unsure about when we from Chicago were going to Kentucky. We didn't know we thought we didn't know what a creationist was like. And then we realized, everyone, you can't tell. Everyone, we're all the same. It's not, there's not a clear marker that tells who believes what.
Right.
And I think that was an important thing for us to know. And hopefully someone viewing the film might come away with that as well.
And some of the buses you were seeing?
Yeah.
Coming from Wisconsin, Nebraska, Massachusetts.
Really?
Yes, their churches, I've heard from all those places that their churches are offering trips to the Creation Museum and the Ark. They have a ticket that you can go to both. And they're coming out of their churches, and they're full buses of people who are going.
And so, Monica, you saw billboards in California for the Creation.
Billboards are and television spots all over the United States. Yes, there was one came up on TV in California. So, and we see the billboards driving from Chicago over. We see them all the way along the way, and people from Michigan see them coming in there. And I've heard from Pennsylvania coming in there. In fact, I saw one in New York. I'm in New York now, and there was a billboard about the Creation Museum and the Ark.
Wow. And I see a question right here from an anonymous attendee. Are both the Creation Museum and the Ark for-profit companies?
That's tricky.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. In some ways it depends. It depends on, they are nonprofit, that they are church organizations, but they're for-profit in that they are attractions that they can then receive the tax benefits from. So they have both under the umbrella is both a for-profit and a non-profit section, and it's very complicated. So the answer is kind of both.
Mm.
In order to get tax credits, they made the ARC. Yeah, it's tricky though, but it's the ARC itself, I believe, is for profit so that it could get the tax benefits of being a tourist attraction. And the land is not for profit. So that's how tricky it is.
Or maybe the other way around, but something like
that. The other way around, I was going to say, is that it was tax reasons and to get that money that they made it a certain way. And you can look up the history. There's a history of them changing it from one to another. It's very complex.
Wow.
So actually, David McMillan is here with us. So he just texted a little answer here to that. The ARC is for profit, but is a wholly owned subsidiary of AIG. The Creation Museum is wholly nonprofit. This organization called Crosswater Canyon is the for-profit company that owns the ARC attraction, and it's owned by AIG. So yeah, complicated.
Kind of a related question. I think this is related. Somebody has asked, an anonymous viewer, participant, what is Ken Ham's motive? Is he a true believer, or is it about money and power?
That's tricky too.
Oh.
We came to the conclusion that he is a believer.
Mm-hmm.
We would absolutely say he is a believer. That he employs his family and makes money out of it, that's true too. But we did not doubt the fact that he is a hardcore believer.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Melanie Lovell, not a comment. She just said praised the film. She said it was great, and she says Dan Phelps is a national treasure who needs to be protected. Does Dan Phelps need protection?
Well, I don't think he needs protection, but he definitely is a national treasure. Okay. He needs assistance. He needs help.
He needs help. Is what he needs. He needs other scientists to get on board, start speaking out, help him do some of these things and get this before the public. Protection, I don't think he needs, but it's very heartwarming to hear that people respond that way to Dan.
Yeah. Terry Mason writes, there must be organizations of scientists who are aware they need to do more public education and strategic communication about science in the United States. Did you learn anything about these organizations? They would benefit from seeing your film.
Right.
There are several. Of course, the American Association for the Advancement of Science is very aware that they need to, it's a huge organization of scientists that it's all about engaging the public. But based in San Francisco, the National Center for Science Education, which was run for many years by Eugenie Scott, who was a mentor of Dan Phelps, and that organization gave Dan Phelps the Friend of Darwin Award, and Eugenie Scott was very active in that Dover trial case. That's an organization that is aggressively pursuing education in biology classes of evolution. That's a wonderful organization that everyone should be aware of. So they are out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't want to imply that there aren't scientists out there who are working on science education. We ran into Kentucky people who were too afraid of Ken Ham and the Creation Museum pushback, but it is, or the AIG pushback, but it's not to say that there aren't really dedicated science education people who are trying very hard on this. And Eugenie Scott was she came to our premiere in San Francisco, and she was very complimentary of the fact that we had a Baptist minister in there, and that we weren't just preaching to the choir, we were trying to engage people in the idea of science denial at this level, and not be mocking, but be trying to say, listen, not all, you can be Christian and accept the theory of evolution. And so we thought that was important to say, because we were trying to anticipate what it means just to preach to the choir and what it means to engage everyone in it. So
Mhm, mhm. Um, are from Ron Newman? Are these the same people behind the intelligent design nonsense? Um, I'm not sure what that means. Intelligent design. Does that
Well,
resonate?
yes, intelligent design was actually what was being promoted in the Dover school case. And that is a more subtle version of, this idea of the designer. And so that was maybe a more concentrated effort to get a version of science into the schools that referenced a designer. The creationists are not very impressed with intelligent designers because they believe intelligent design doesn't go far enough. And so in a lot of ways, creationism, because they believe the universe is only 6,000 years old and every word in the Bible is literally true, in some ways, they haven't really pushed too much to get that in schools. They do, but they've gone an alternate route and just created their own curriculum, which David McMillan, the former creationist in the film, grew up on. All of this homeschooling curriculum comes from AIG. So they're very aggressive about going that route.
Mhm.
So,
and they criticize intelligent design. So there is a difference there, but intelligent design came out of this idea of, okay, you won't let us say this in the classroom, how about this? And so it was a more general kind of thing. Can we just admit that the world was created by a specific designer? So,
do we want to hear from David about that, since he's aware of intelligent design and the homeschooling and the curriculum?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we get him on here, or?
I'm here by audio.
David, welcome, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Glad you're here.
Creationists, they love to identify with the intelligent design movement when it is convenient for them. One of the things that is touched on and is portrayed a little bit in the film, but it's very common in creationist circles, is this persecution narrative that creationists are the David against the Goliath. Creationists are being hounded out by the scientific, I guess, the scientific cabal of this conspiracy. They don't call it a conspiracy theory. They say it's just sort of a peer pressure thing. But they like that conspiratorial persecution narrative. So they love to identify with films like there's a Stein film a while back. It was Expelled, I think. Lots of they like to identify with this idea that anyone who challenges the scientific consensus is going to be persecuted, and so they'll make references to intelligent design in that context. But when it comes to what they teach their rank and file, they will say, look, yeah, intelligent design doesn't go far enough. We don't want intelligent design in schools because really we're the ones who want to have control of the narrative. Yeah. And so they like to use it to bolster their sense of persecution, but they don't subscribe to the actual strategies or the actual goals of the ID movement.
Mm-hmm. This is David McMillan, who's featured in the film. Someone just chatted and asked who was speaking. David McMillan has a major.
He's the former creationist in the film.
Former creationist who's now living in California or New York?
DC.
Yeah. Monica and Clayton, the film ends sort of showing that the community didn't benefit as much from the Ark encounter as they had hoped. Have you been in touch, been back there, seen if that's remained the case? Has it gotten any better? Does the museum still have a lot of visitors, or was that just when it first opened? Do you know how it's doing now?
Well, the latest things we get from Dan is the fact that they had to close down and lay off we're all in a situation now where everything is closing. And so it's hard to determine I'll use it again, Clayton, what the arc of the Ark was going to be, because now we all of a sudden, everything's, so will they survive? Yeah. I don't know. Will they survive this pandemic? I don't know. as far as the town of Williamstown,
Mhm.
we haven't been back in a while, but from what we've heard, no, there isn't much benefit, and they are the closest one to the Ark. There's another community that's had a couple motels come in there.
Mhm.
So, and again, in these times, it's difficult to even talk about this, because what is going to survive, what isn't,
Right.
I don't think we know.
Right. Right.
And it's difficult to get attendance numbers because of what we were talking about earlier, private versus public organizations. So the only way to get numbers is, it's a little bit complicated, but Williamstown put a tax on each individual attendee, and then Dan can then go get a Freedom of Information request and find out the actual numbers as opposed to the ones that Ken Ham is reporting. And they're still having people, but Doug seems to think things are still booming, the designer. But Dan noted that before the shutdown, they were starting to close, I think, on Sundays and Mondays because maybe the attendance wasn't up. But recently, in an op-ed as a result of the film, Ken Ham mentioned that he was sorry that the town of Williamstown wasn't benefiting, but in a way he kind of blamed them. They were on the wrong side of the highway. And so what could they expect? The problem, of course, and David wrote about this in an op-ed on Medium, that they were promised a lot. And so now it's a little disingenuous to say, well, I'm sorry, this was never going to work, when they were promised a lot in the beginning.
And they were always on that other side of the highway.
Yeah.
Even when they were made promises. So.
Yeah. Carol Dinow, please give us the link to rate this film so we can award it more stars.
Oh,
That's
great.
nice.
Well, yeah, we can maybe do that through Mary afterwards, but you can just search it on IMDb. It's also on Amazon and iTunes. So any place you give it a good rating would be.
So it is available online, but you have you've been in film festivals, and which are you still on the festival circuit, or are you just
not really? Okay. Because when it broadcast on PBS on Independent Lens back in February,
okay,
that's generally we'd been on the circuit for about a year.
Okay. We were supposed to start the European, and we had a couple three there. But now they've been canceled or postponed
to September. Yeah.
I hope that we may be over there in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been on PBS, so.
Yes, that's great. That's great. Somebody said their questions got answered. What does AIG think the motivation is of scientists? What do they think the point of the supposed science conspiracy is? I'm not sure I understand that, but I'm going to follow up on that by asking you about the scientists, like that woman at the beginning of the film who had a PhD. They call themselves scientists, those that are very, very strong creationists. Do they just believe more in creation than science, or do they use their science as sort of a pseudo title to give them more credibility? Then the great sequence in the conference where they were selling all this scientific evidence. Is that all part of their PR?
Well, it's both, because it is part of the PR in that Ken Ham, in that line to the public, he says, talk to our PhD scientists. You won't understand what they're saying, but talk to them. So they are very proud of the fact that they have PhD scientists. They even have on staff a PhD scientist from Harvard. He got his PhD in Harvard. They do have actual PhDs. They aren't fake degrees. And what's so fascinating about it is the creationists will be the first ones to say, oh, we love science. We absolutely love science. And they will embrace all of science. It's just when you get to the age of the earth and geology and evolution, they deviate so wildly from mainstream science. But everywhere else, they're very current.
We used to think.
We were talking to the PhD.
We used to think about the difference between what they were learning and the experiments they were doing, We asked the PhD from Harvard. He said that as long as he didn't get into deep time or anything that had to do with evolution, and he just walled himself over here and did this. And I asked him, how did your supervisor at Harvard in biological science, he was in medical science, and he said, well, my supervisor said he had this woman who wouldn't work with animals, and she wouldn't do experiments because she was an animal rights person. And he said, I thought, how can you go into a biology and not do experiments with animals? That's ridiculous. And so his supervisor said, okay, I'm going to treat you the same. You won't do deep science because you're a creationist, and you won't deal with animals, but we're going to bring you through. And so he said, you just have to pick and choose what you study. And so I don't know about Georgia Purdom, who got it from Ohio State, I believe it is. I don't know. David said you have this thing where you open it up and you let something in that you can fit, and then you close it like this as soon as information comes to you that doesn't fit. So I think all the way through a PhD program, they must do that. It's hard to figure out.
From Mark, I looked up the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee was in 1925. Are you optimistic that as part of the 100th anniversary celebration in 5 years, creationists will accept evolution?
No.
And other people, I just want to say, we're getting a lot of questions about, is this hopeless? Are you hopeful that this is, given the climate we're in right now, there's also the climate change denying. I mean, it is all part of a big piece, isn't it?
We did the Southern Circuit recently and that was the travel through Kentucky and in North Carolina and all the way to Alabama. And there were a lot of colleges, and some of them were faith-based colleges, and we were talking to young people. And when I talk to general audiences, when we talk to them, we usually say, what can we do? And I would say, you can talk to your biology teacher. Like I said, you can talk to your school board. You can get activists in how is science being taught in the classroom and care about that. You can ask people who are running for office, do you accept the theory of evolution? I mean, we have that little clip where it says how many of you don't accept, and all these hands go up at the Republican, Yeah. So both Republicans and Democrats, not making it politicized, ask your politicians when they're running, do you accept the theory of evolution could be a very good one. And how do you feel about science now? How do you feel about global warming and our response to it? Because global warming doesn't care whether you believe or not, it's happening. So, there are activist things that you can say. Now, we also were asked, I remember twice I was asked if I went into this film with one idea and came out with a different view. No, they weren't going to convince me that I shouldn't believe in evolution, but I wasn't going to convince them that they should believe in evolution.
I would agree. I feel like I'm not hopeful in the near term because, as we all know, we're extremely politicized right now in a divided nation. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think it ultimately will change. I think we're not there yet. I think one thing that works to our advantage is this rise of technology and this rise of easy communication, where it's a little more difficult. Oh, but then I was about to say it's more difficult to isolate ourselves, but actually no, in some ways it's easier to isolate ourselves. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I'm not hopeful anytime in the near term that that's going to really turn around.
I would be interested to hear what David says about this. Is David hopeful, being a former creationist? Because we did have young people come up to us at the circuit and say, I am David. There was quite a few people who identify with David. So the Davids of this world may be our hope. Mm-hmm. So what do you say, David? What do you feel? Is it hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. because these organizations, these parachurch organizations, this world, it's so insular, and they're so good at insulating themselves from the outside world, and their ability to take any outside criticism, any outside scrutiny, and turn it around to play into their persecution narrative and play into the sympathies of their followers is very good. And so it's very difficult to break into it. One of the things that scientists generally have done, that they have taken mainstream scientists, they have taken kind of a look, if we don't if we don't give it any legitimacy, then it'll go away. And while I agree with not giving it legitimacy or not treating it like it's another alternative theory, it leaves the gaps there. And so as long as people sort of ignore it and let it be, they're going to continue filling in the gaps that people have, and it's going to continue to be an attractive solution or an attractive alternative for the people who say, yeah, science doesn't have all the answers. We are looking for, we're looking for something that allows us to view the universe in a different way, and so this looks like an attractive explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that hopeful? I don't know.
Not yet.
Well, I think that some of the most troubling scenes were the ones with the children. So that's what makes, I think, the lack of hope. They're being brought up in this without, as David was, until they're old enough to do research on their own, if that day comes. For me, it was the Ken Ham saying, were you there? Real blatant indoctrination. But when the parents are taking them to the exhibits, and one is saying there were giants, I mean, let alone the dinosaurs and man together, but they used to be giants. I mean, things that must just be so confusing to children. And
the response to that is, why were there giants? And she says, I don't know, there just were. And that's another perfectly encapsulated moment. We could never have written that. It says so much in that little exchange.
And do remember the Amazon-like warehouse, which is probably going on full steam right now with it being closed. And they said thousands of families use that across the nation.
Tens of thousands.
And I know that the biology teacher I talked to in California said that when she wanted to teach evolution to middle school kids, she went online, and the very first thing that came up was AIG and science curriculum for students. And she said, oh my gosh, it came up. And I said, yeah, they're very much out there. So it's all over the place. And we just have to, I can only say the hope is in us. The hope is in asking the right questions, caring, and voting, and getting out there and doing something. We've got to have young people who come up to us all the time and say, what can we do? And well, go out and vote and ask the right questions before you vote.
Right. What's next for the two of you, just to talk about as filmmakers? As you said, this was your third. I know you've both done other things, but have you thought about another project, or are you still involved in this so much?
We're still involved in this one. Yes, I'm not quite sure. We may take a little detour. I might do some fiction work, and
Yep.
Monica's got other stuff going on too.
We're both working on separate projects right now while we unroll this. One thing you have to know about films is that with The Believers, which we really love that film, and we didn't have the resources because we're part of a not-for-profit organization, and we needed to fill our mission by going on and making another film. So we didn't really roll that out as much as we should have. And there is this whole process that's a lot of work, and you have to be on top of it, and you have to do publicity and marketing and social media and everything. So we determined with this one, we're going to give ourselves time to really roll it out and do the work that's required of that before we jump. And so we're both working on our own projects right now while we roll this out. While we're
So that's
locked in our homes.
Yeah. It's a good plug to go watch The Believers.
Yes.
You can see it.
We'll tell people where to find it. Your previous film and this one is also available. So there's still a lot of people listening, and they can go tell people they know about this film. So
okay, tell them.
The Believers is available how?
We'll send, I think we can send links out as well, but it's, you can get it on iTunes, or the iMovie. It might be on Amazon Prime. I'm not exactly sure. I know it's on Apple iMovies.
Believers is on Prime.
It is? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We should know these things.
Yeah, we should.
And this film, We Believe in Dinosaurs, is you were saying earlier, it's available because people want to give it higher ratings.
Yeah. So that one, it's on iMovies, it's on Amazon, it's on Google Play, it's on Vudu, it's on Fandango, it's on Xbox, so lots of places.
Great. Okay, I don't know if we have a little more time. I know we're supposed to wrap by 1. You talked about hope. I mean, there is this thread, and this question I just see has come in about there's a sentiment out there of anti-intellectualism. This one says so prevalent in our sports, celebrity, online culture. Is that feeding some of this? Are we in a climate today? We mentioned the global warming, but I feel like it's also driving some of the resistance to the scientific evidence around this coronavirus. Do you feel, I mean, is that frustrating to be seeing it happening again with either one of you?
It is for me. I think in the last 3 decades, there's been this rise in the importance of trusting your gut, and I just feel it's this, and a weird companion of that is this sort of idea that I don't need to listen to the experts. I know, and so I don't know the science. I don't know this. I don't really need to know it. And there's a certain distrust of science, of people who have answers, of people who are experts, because they're seen as somehow elite. Yes. And I think there's a real anti-elite, whatever that means, sentiment in America that's only gotten more and more intense. Mm-hmm. And then you couple that with the idea, as we were talking about earlier, that experts have to have some kind of agenda. And whatever agenda they have, I don't trust it. So the idea is I'm better off just listening to my gut is a dangerous place to be. And I think that has seen it's in ascendance right now.
And the politicization of science that we're talking about. So if there is Democrat science and there's Republican science, then we have to be true to that, no matter what the facts. And of course, we've had alternative facts discussion for quite a while, and this certainly comes under
fake news,
and opinion versus a fact. And like Clayton said, my gut tells me that this is true, and instead of listening to fact, it's like the creationists turned the scientific method upside down. Yeah. And I think a return to thinking about what is the scientific method. It's a way of critical thinking that we're losing in this country. Mm-hmm. That you have an hypothesis that you're trying to prove right or wrong. You just have a hypothesis, something that, and it isn't pulled from the air. It isn't, in science, it isn't just pulled from the air and say, I think this is true. No, if you're going to do an experiment, you have to come up with a really good hypothesis that has some kind of chance of being true. Then you do the experiment. Then you look at the data and you say, is this true or not true? Not, this is true, therefore everything we do has to prove it, which is what the creationists do. So it's the opposite of critical thinking. It's the opposite of the scientific method. And what I asked audiences when I was down in the South, I was doing these faith-based colleges, and I said, I just want you to think about what this is doing to a tool that we have to solve some of our problems. Yeah. And that's what the theory of evolution is, a predictive tool. And if we're going to have new vaccines and new antibiotics, which we desperately need, then researchers need to use the theory of evolution. Because I think many people say, what difference does it make if people accept the theory of evolution? It's just a theory. It's just out there. It's a theory. And that's so dangerous thinking, because it's a predictive tool that's used in medical laboratories. That's my plea for the scientific method.
We want to end this on a hopeful note, and we got a couple of nice, excellent sessions. Thanks so much for hosting it. I will go and rate the film now. And Liz Holbrook, thank you. This presentation was excellent, and the rating on IMDb is up to 5.9. I'll spread the word to watch the film. So you're reaching people, and people are responding and wanting to get the word out about We Believe in Dinosaurs. So I hope.
Great. Thank you so much.
You guys have been so great and generous and forthcoming with such great information. This was really a lot of fun, and I think very illuminating for the people who tuned in, which we had quite a nice crowd here.
Wow.
So
thank you so much for GlobeDocs for having us, and thanks to everyone for watching. It's really gratifying to hear all of the interest.
We were really looking forward to coming into your theater in your city.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing it this way, so we can still do it.
Great. Well, it's not the same as live, but boy, this sure perked up my day. Actually, had to get out of the sweatpants. It was.
Sweatpants on. It's just the upper that you.
Right.
Oh, I do. But I'm so grateful to you for offering such insight into your work, and for doing something that's so important. It's so important, especially now. So thank you again. And I know from the comments that people really enjoyed this. So
great. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.